By the time this call came in, the dispatch center was already stretched thin, a taut wire humming with an unbearable frequency. The air conditioning unit in the corner struggled, wheezing under the relentless summer heat, mirroring the strained breathing of the dispatchers hunched over their consoles. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, unforgiving glow on faces etched with exhaustion, each line a testament to endless nights and chaotic days. Muffled sounds from various corners of the room blended into a cacophony of urgency. The staccato clicks of keyboards, the low murmur of voices relaying critical information, the insistent ring of incoming lines that never seemed to cease. It wasn't just busy, it was a maelstrom, a whirlpool of distress calls pulling everyone closer to the edge. This particular night had begun with a major traffic pileup on the interstate, a multi-vehicle collision that had snarled arteries for miles and demanded every available unit. Then, almost immediately, a brush fire had erupted on the outskirts of town, fanned by unseasonably strong winds, threatening a cluster of homes. These two incidents alone would have tested the limits of any well-staffed center, but here, in this beleaguered facility, they were merely the overture to a symphony of chaos. The staff, already operating on minimal resources due to budget cuts and a recent flu outbreak, moved with a weary efficiency, their movements precise but devoid of their usual briskness. Their eyes, though focused, held a distant, almost haunted quality, reflecting the weight of the lives they held in their hands. The digital clock above the main console glowed an unforgiving red. Road 2, 47 a.m. Another call blinked on the screen, an anonymous number from a cell phone. No big deal, usually, but there was something about the way it pulsed, a faint, almost imperceptible difference in its rhythm compared to the others that caught Sarah's eye. Sarah, a veteran dispatcher with 15 years of experience, had seen it all. She'd handled everything from runaway pets to armed robberies, from heart attacks to full-blown natural disasters. Her calm demeanor was legendary, a steady anchor in the storm. Yet, as she reached for the headset, a prickle of unease snaked down her spine. This wasn't just another routine emergency. This felt different. The background noise on the line was unlike anything she'd heard before. It wasn't the distant wail of sirens, nor the frantic shouts of a domestic dispute. It was a low, resonant thrum, almost like a machine, overlaid with what sounded like wind, but not the natural kind. And underneath it all, a faint, almost imperceptible gasp. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type, ready to categorize, ready to dispatch. But the silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by that strange mechanical hum. The other dispatchers, engrossed in their own battles, were oblivious to the subtle shift in the room's energy, to the tiny ripple this single, silent call was making. But Sarah felt it. She felt the sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature, the faint whisper of something truly unsettling. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. What was this call? What was waiting on the other end of the line? And why did it feel like the entire world was about to hold its breath? The digital display continued to blink, an ominous beacon in the dimly lit room, promising a revelation that would push them all beyond their breaking point. The dispatch center was a crucible that night, forging exhaustion into a brittle resilience. Long before the peculiar call had even registered, the facility had been operating at a critical level of stress. The multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate, a disaster unfolding across several miles, had been a voracious consumer of resources, drawing in every available patrol car, ambulance, and fire engine from District 1 and 2. Just as the initial chaos of that incident began to simmer down, the brush fire ignited, its orange glow visible from the highest points of the city, demanding a fresh surge of manpower and equipment. Firefighters, already weary from the earlier highway incident, were rerouted, their faces grim under the glare of their headlamps. Adding to this relentless onslaught, a sudden, unexpected power outage had plunged a significant portion of the city's northern sector into darkness, triggering a cascade of alarms, emergency calls from elderly residents trapped in elevators, and reports of downed power lines. Each incident, in isolation, would have been manageable. Together they formed an unyielding wave that crashed repeatedly against the fragile bulwark of the dispatch system. The staff, already reduced to a skeleton crew, were stretched beyond any reasonable limit. 2 dispatchers were out sick with a particularly virulent flu, and another had recently retired, leaving a gaping void that budget constraints had prevented from being filled. The remaining team had been working 12-hour shifts, often back-to-back, their breaks mere fleeting moments to gulp down lukewarm coffee or stare blankly at a wall, trying to reset their overloaded minds. The room itself bore the silent scars of this prolonged siege. Empty coffee cups littered desks, their contents long since evaporated, leaving behind dark, sticky rings. Crumpled energy drink cans formed small metallic monuments to desperation. On a whiteboard, usually pristine, a hastily scrawled tally of active incidents consumed 2/3 of the space, each entry a testament to a fresh crisis. The digital call log, typically displaying a manageable queue, now scrolled ceaselessly, a relentless river of incoming calls that threatened to overflow its banks. The average wait time, usually a matter of seconds, had ballooned to over 2 minutes, a stark indicator of the system's profound distress. A quick glance at the clock on the wall, its red digits mocking their fatigue, revealed that it was already past 3 a.m. The night was far from over, and yet they had already processed more calls in the last 6 hours than on an average full day. The sheer volume was staggering, a relentless numerical assault. On a typical night, they might handle 300 calls. This night, they were well over 800 and climbing, with no end in sight. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable hum of collective exhaustion and hypervigilance. Every dispatcher moved with a robotic precision, their faces etched with the strain, their eyes betraying the deep fatigue that gnawed at their concentration. They functioned on instinct, on years of training, pushing past the physical and mental barriers of what was considered humanly possible. This wasn't just a busy night. It was a testament to a system pushed to its absolute breaking point, a fragile structure teetering on the precipice of collapse. The critical call that had just blinked on Sarah's screen wasn't arriving into a system ready to absorb it. It was landing directly into the eye of an already raging storm, threatening to be the singular final drop that would cause the entire dam to burst. The very foundation of their operational capacity was eroded, their resources depleted, and their human capital at its lowest ebb. The stage was set, not just for an emergency, but for a true test of endurance, a battle waged not against a single threat, but against the cumulative weight of an entire city's despair. The digital line blinked, a solitary beacon amidst the chaos, demanding attention. Sarah, her hand hovering over the answer button, felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't the urgency of the light itself. Every line was urgent tonight. It was the strange, almost hesitant way it glowed, unlike the frantic, insistent pulses of the other incoming calls. Taking a deep breath, a small, involuntary sigh escaping her lips, she pressed the button, her voice, despite the fatigue, retaining its professional calm. 911, what's your emergency? A garbled sound met her ear, a mixture of static and what sounded like wind. Then, a voice, thin and reedy, almost swallowed by the background noise. Hello? Can you hear me? The words were fragmented, broken, as if the caller were struggling to form them, or perhaps struggling to stay upright. Sarah leaned closer to her headset, adjusting the volume, trying to filter out the relentless hum of the dispatch center around her. Yes, I can hear you. What is your emergency, sir? A long pause followed, filled only with the unsettling sound of rushing air and a faint, rhythmic thump. It wasn't the familiar cacophony of a car crash, nor the distinct rhythm of a struggle. It was something else, something less identifiable, and therefore more unnerving. I think I'm lost. The voice was barely a whisper now, laced with an undeniable tremor. Lost? In the middle of an urban emergency, with sirens wailing in the distance, a simple case of being lost felt utterly out of place. Yet the caller's distress was palpable. "Lost where, sir? Can you tell me your location? What do you see around you?" Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together the disjointed fragments. Was this a confused elderly person? A child? The voice sounded adult, but the disorientation was profound. The thumping sound intensified slightly, accompanied by a low moan. "It's dark, very dark, and cold." The words were punctuated by gasps, as if the caller was struggling for breath. Sarah's brow furrowed. Dark and cold wasn't enough. "Are you indoors or outdoors, sir? Is there anyone else with you? Can you hear other people?" The questions tumbled out, each one an attempt to anchor the caller to reality, to draw out a concrete detail that could be fed into their system, a location to dispatch help to. But the answers were elusive, frustratingly vague. I don't know. I fell. I think I fell." The thumping sound grew louder, more distinct now, almost like something heavy being dragged or dropped repeatedly. And then, a new sound, faint at first, then rising in intensity. A high-pitched, almost mechanical whine, followed by a sudden jarring clang. Sarah's heart gave a lurch. That wasn't wind. That wasn't just someone lost. The background noises were escalating, painted a picture far more sinister than simple disorientation. The caller's breathing became ragged, punctuated by what sounded like whimpers. "Sir, are you injured? What happened? Can you tell me what those sounds are?" Sarah's voice tightened, a flicker of genuine alarm piercing through her professional veneer. The fragmented details, the strained communication, the escalating, unidentifiable sounds. It all converged into a chilling realization. This wasn't just a confused call. This was something deeply wrong, something unfolding in real time, obscured by static and fear. The true nature of this strange call remained shrouded, but the unsettling feeling in Sarah's gut screamed that it was far from benign, and its implications could be catastrophic. The initial confusion had given way to a burgeoning sense of dread, a premonition that this particular call was about to unravel everything they thought they knew about emergency response. The call extended, growing more complex and urgent with each passing second, a relentless tide of ambiguity threatening to drown Sarah's composure. The whines and clangs in the background intensified, morphing from isolated sounds into a continuous grinding cacophony. It was mechanical, undoubtedly, but what kind of machinery produced such a terrifying symphony? The caller's whimpers had escalated into choked sobs, interspersed with unintelligible pleas. "Help, please, it's moving," the voice gasped, a fresh wave of panic evident in its fragile tone. Moving. Sarah's mind raced through possible scenarios. A vehicle accident where the wreckage was shifting, a structural collapse. But the caller had mentioned falling, being lost, and the dark. None of it quite fit. As Sarah tried to elicit more coherent information, the dispatch system, already groaning under the weight of the day's emergencies, began to show new cracks directly linked to this single, perplexing call. Another dispatcher, Mark, called out from across the room, his voice strained. "Sarah, I've got a call about strange noises down by the old industrial complex, near the river. High-pitched whine, metallic clanging. Any chance it's related?" Sarah's eyes widened, a cold dread snaking through her. The industrial complex. That was miles from the initial vague description of being lost, somewhere dark and cold. But the sounds matched. The implications were chilling. If the caller was indeed at the industrial complex, their initial disorientation could have been due to injury or shock, but the moving part now took on a far more sinister meaning. Existing resources, already stretched thin, were now pulled in multiple directions, creating new complications. The nearest patrol unit, previously en route to a domestic disturbance, was rerouted to investigate the industrial complex, leaving the original incident potentially unattended. Another ambulance, initially dispatched to a minor fender bender, was now put on standby for a potential industrial accident, delaying its response time to the less critical but still important call. "Sir, can you confirm you are near the old industrial complex? The one by the river?" Sarah pressed, her voice urgent, trying to cut through the caller's mounting terror. The sounds on the line were now punctuated by what sounded like heavy scraping, a guttural groan of metal against metal. "No, I don't know. It's dark. I fell. I'm under something." The words were barely audible, choked by fear and the overwhelming background noise. Under something. The phrase hung in the air, a terrifying implication. Simultaneously, a new alarm blared on Sarah's console. An automated sensor, part of the city's aging infrastructure monitoring system, had just flagged a critical pressure drop in a seldom-used section of the underground storm drain network, precisely in the vicinity of the industrial complex. The system, designed to detect blockages or leaks, rarely triggered such a severe alert without cause. A cycle of problem, attempted solution, and new complication was rapidly spiraling out of control. The caller was lost, then injured, now possibly trapped, and the environment itself was signaling distress. The supervisor, Lieutenant Evans, a man whose face usually remained a mask of stoic calm, stood beside Sarah's desk, his expression grim. He'd been monitoring the call, his years of experience telling him this was no ordinary situation. "Sarah, we're getting reports of a localized power fluctuation in that same sector," he murmured, his voice low, adding another layer to the already complex puzzle. "And a faint tremor detected by the seismic sensors at the water treatment plant, also in that area. It's intermittent, but consistent with heavy machinery in motion, or ground instability." The situation was escalating beyond standard protocols, far beyond the typical scope of a lost person call. It was no longer just about one distressed individual. It was a cascade of interconnected emergencies, each feeding into the other, threatening to unravel the entire delicate balance of their already overburdened system. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. The unsettling feeling had blossomed into full-blown alarm. This wasn't just a call. It was a crisis, a multifaceted disaster unfolding in excruciating slow motion, and they were racing against an unseen clock. The sheer weight of converging problems threatened to crush the dispatch center, pushing them towards an operational limit they hadn't faced in years. Every new piece of information, every additional alarm, was another twist of the knife, deepening the cut into their already threadbare resources. The weight of converging problems finally pushed the dispatch center past its breaking point. Lieutenant Evans's face, usually a picture of composure, now reflected the grim reality that was unfolding. He watched the digital map on the main screen, a sea of red icons denoting ongoing incidents, and saw the last available patrol car, marked by a blinking green square, vanish from the grid as it was rerouted to the industrial complex. A heavy silence descended upon the usually bustling floor, broken only by the frantic tapping of keyboards and the hushed, urgent tones of dispatchers on other lines. Every single unit, every single resource was now accounted for, and none were free. "We're out of units," Evans stated, his voice devoid of its usual authority, replaced by a weary resignation. The words hung in the air, a stark declaration of their operational limit. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The phrase, "out of units," was the one they dreaded most, a siren call of impending failure. It meant that any new emergency, any new plea for help, would go unanswered, at least for a critical period. It meant difficult decisions, choices with no good outcomes, where one life might be prioritized over another, not by design, but by sheer brutal necessity. On Sarah's screen, the caller's icon remained stationary, a tiny beacon of distress amidst the growing chaos. The automated alert from the storm drain network continued to flash, now accompanied by a new notification. Elevated gas readings in the same vicinity. The tremor reports were becoming more frequent, more pronounced. It was as if the very ground beneath the industrial complex was groaning under some unseen pressure. The situation was no longer confined to a single individual. It was an environmental threat, an unfolding disaster that demanded immediate, widespread attention. Yet their hands were tied. "Hold everything else," Evans commanded, his voice regaining a fraction of its steel, but laced with an undeniable desperation. This directive meant pausing all non-critical calls, delaying responses to less severe incidents, effectively putting the city on a temporary emergency hold. It was a measure reserved for the gravest of circumstances, a tacit admission that they were teetering on the edge of complete systemic failure. The other dispatchers, overhearing the command, exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with the fatigue of a relentless shift and the dawning realization of the gravity of the situation. Sarah, her hand still pressed to her headset, tried to process the implications. A domestic dispute, a fender bender, a minor medical emergency. All these calls, each representing a person in need, would now have to wait. The weight of those delayed responses settled heavily on her shoulders, adding to the immense pressure of the call she was currently handling. She could hear the faint, desperate whimpering of the caller, interspersed with metallic groans and the undeniable sound of rushing water. The storm drain alert, the gas readings, the tremors, it all clicked into a terrifying picture. The caller wasn't just lost or injured. They were likely caught in some kind of structural collapse, possibly involving the underground infrastructure. The system, designed for efficiency, for rapid response, was now paralyzed, its resources depleted, its capacity overwhelmed. The lines between the various emergencies blurred, creating a single, monstrous incident that threatened to consume everything. The dispatch center, the vital nerve center of the city's emergency response, was at its operational limit, pushed to the very brink of collapse. The question wasn't if the system would fail, but how spectacularly it would do so and what the human cost would be. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes fixed on the blinking red light of the incoming call, knowing that every second counted and that they had virtually nothing left to give. The silence in the room, once a sign of focused work, now felt like the ominous quiet before a storm. The silence, once a sign of focused work, now felt like the ominous quiet before a storm, pressing down on Sarah with an almost physical weight. Her fingers, usually nimble and precise across the keyboard, now moved with a sluggishness born of sheer exhaustion. Hours had melted into a timeless blur of frantic voices, flashing alerts, and the relentless thrum of the dispatch center, operating far beyond its intended capacity. Her eyes, bloodshot and ringed with dark shadows, stared unseeing at the complex matrix of screens before her, each displaying a fragment of the unfolding disaster. The weight of responsibility, a burden she usually carried with professional stoicism, was now a crushing force, threatening to buckle her beneath its immense pressure. She could feel the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her headset, a subtle but persistent shake that spoke volumes about her internal state. Her breathing, usually even and controlled, had become shallow and ragged, each inhale a conscious effort. The metallic taste of fear and adrenaline coated her tongue, a constant reminder of the high stakes involved. She pictured the caller, trapped and terrified, her voice a desperate plea echoing in Sarah's mind, and the image compounded the profound sense of helplessness. There were no more units, no more resources to deploy, only the agonizing weight and the impossible task of maintaining a semblance of calm for a person teetering on the edge of oblivion. Her gaze drifted momentarily to the digital clock on her monitor, its glowing red numbers a stark testament to the unforgiving passage of time. The shift, which felt like an eternity, still had hours to run, and the thought of enduring more minutes, let alone hours, filled her with a deep, bone-weary dread. She saw the reflections of her colleagues in the darkened glass of the monitors, their faces mirroring her own exhaustion, hollowed out by stress and anxiety. Each small, involuntary sigh, each prolonged blink, was a silent acknowledgement of the shared burden, the collective strain on their mental and emotional reserves. The usual banter, the quick jokes that often punctuated the lulls in calls, had long since vanished, replaced by a strained quiet, punctuated only by the urgent murmur of voices into headsets. A wave of nausea washed over her, a direct consequence of the relentless pressure and the lack of proper sustenance. She hadn't eaten since the early hours of the shift, and the coffee, once a reliable ally, now only served to amplify the jittery edge of her nerves. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, a persistent drumbeat accompanying the cacophony of her thoughts. Every decision felt monumental, every word she uttered to the caller, a potential lifeline or a catastrophic misstep. The ethical dilemmas, usually abstract concepts discussed in training, were now stark, brutal realities. Who to save? Who to let wait? These were not questions she was trained to answer, yet they were implicitly laid at her feet with every unavailable unit. The image of the storm drain, the gas readings, the tremors, all coalesced into a single, terrifying vision in her mind. She imagined the caller, their sanctuary collapsing around them, the rising water, the noxious fumes. The vividness of the scene, conjured from fragmented information, made her stomach clench. She felt a profound loneliness, isolated by the headset, by the critical information only she possessed, and by the immense responsibility that no one else could share in that precise moment. The weight of human suffering, channeled directly into her ears, threatened to break through her professional facade, to shatter the last vestiges of her composure. She took another shaky breath, forcing herself to focus, to push back against the encroaching despair. The human element, the very core of their service, was on the verge of collapse, tested not by a single dramatic event, but by the relentless, grinding pressure of an entire system pushed beyond its limits. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. A unit, previously tied up on a minor traffic incident that had now cleared, reported back into service. Then another. A patrol car that had been investigating a false alarm became available. Sarah, her voice still strained but now laced with a thin thread of renewed hope, managed to relay the updated information to the trapped caller. The relief in the caller's voice, though still faint, was a palpable tremor that resonated through the headset, providing Sarah with a much-needed, albeit temporary, surge of energy. It wasn't a sudden, triumphant breakthrough, but rather a grueling inch-by-inch stabilization, a testament to the sheer tenacity of the dispatchers and the responders in the field. The first responders arrived on scene, their coordinated movements a blur of flashing lights and urgent commands. Sarah listened intently, her breath held captive in her chest, as the initial assessment came in over the radio. The structural integrity of the storm drain was compromised, but not beyond repair for an immediate extraction. The gas levels, while still dangerous, were manageable with specialized equipment. It was a harrowing situation, certainly, but no longer a freefall into the abyss. The immediate crisis was contained, the bleeding stemmed, though the wound remained deep and painful. The extraction process was agonizingly slow, each report from the scene punctuated by moments of terrifying silence. Sarah continued to communicate with the caller, offering words of encouragement, guiding them through breathing exercises, and providing updates as they came in. She was their lifeline, their sole connection to the world above, and she clung to that role with every fiber of her being. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the confirmation came. The caller was out, safe, and being assessed by paramedics. A collective silent exhale swept through the dispatch center. The tension, which had been a suffocating blanket for hours, began to lift, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her entire body aching, her hands trembling slightly as she removed the headset. Her eyes, red-rimmed and weary, scanned the room. Her colleagues, equally drained, offered small, weary nods of acknowledgement. There were no cheers, no high-fives, just the quiet recognition of a battle fought and won, albeit narrowly. The immediate crisis had passed, but the scars were etched deep. The system, pushed to its absolute breaking point, had bent but not broken. It had endured, but at an immense cost to those who operated it. The incident would be reviewed, protocols would be scrutinized, and statistics would be compiled, but none of that could fully capture the raw human experience of those agonizing hours. Sarah knew that the memory of the caller's terrified voice, the feeling of utter helplessness, and the crushing weight of responsibility would linger long after the paperwork was filed. The long-term consequences of this near failure were not immediately apparent, but they were undoubtedly there, subtly altering the landscape of the dispatch center. There would be a heightened sense of vigilance, a deeper understanding of the fragility of their resources. The incident would serve as a stark reminder of how quickly an ordinary day could devolve into a desperate struggle for survival, not just for those in peril, but for the very system designed to save them. The relief was immense, a heavy burden lifted, but it was tinged with the sobering realization that such close calls were becoming more frequent, a troubling symptom of an overburdened infrastructure. The quiet hum of the computers, once a comforting backdrop, now seemed to carry a subtle, underlying tremor, a faint echo of the stress it had just endured. The profound testing of their limits had left an indelible mark, a quiet warning that the threads holding their crucial service together were thinner than anyone cared to admit. The exhaustion clinging to Sarah and her colleagues was a palpable presence in the room, a heavy cloak draped over every console and every weary face. It wasn't one single mistake, nor was it a lone failure that had brought them to such a precipice. Instead, it was the crushing, relentless weight of everything happening at once, a perfect storm of simultaneous crises that had converged upon a system already operating at its utmost limit. The sheer volume of incoming calls, the relentless demand for units that simply did not exist. The critical incidents unfolding across the city all contributed to a cascade effect that threatened to collapse the entire operation. Each new emergency piled onto the last, pushing the dispatchers further into a state of acute stress and mental fatigue, their calm voices on the line a stark contrast to the internal turmoil they experienced. This incident served as a stark, unforgettable lesson in the delicate balance that kept their community safe. It wasn't just about the heroic actions of individuals, though those were certainly present in abundance. It was about the infrastructure, the staffing levels, the training, and the often invisible support systems that were constantly under strain. The dispatch center, a vital nerve center for the entire city, was a testament to human resilience, yet also a stark warning about the consequences of underinvestment and chronic overload. The moments of quiet reflection that followed the immediate crisis were filled with a profound understanding that their success, however hard-won, was always precarious. The aftermath of such an event was never truly over. It lingered in the increased heartbeats, at the sound of a particularly urgent tone, in the subtle flinches when a new call registered as critical, in the shared, unspoken understanding that etched itself onto the faces of those who had endured it. There would be debriefings, certainly, and perhaps even new protocols implemented to address specific points of failure or vulnerability. But no amount of procedural adjustment could fully alleviate the deep-seated knowledge that they had come terrifyingly close to the edge. The human cost of operating at such intensity was immense, manifesting in sleepless nights, heightened anxiety, and a persistent, low-level hum of dread that settled into the quiet moments between calls. This experience, while traumatic, also forged an even stronger bond among the dispatchers. They had witnessed each other at their most vulnerable, their most stretched, and their most determined. A silent camaraderie, born of shared hardship, now permeated the air. They understood, perhaps better than anyone else, the invisible battles fought daily within those four walls. The calm voices they projected to the public were not effortless. They were carefully constructed shields designed to instill confidence and maintain control, even when chaos reigned supreme behind the scenes. As the sun began its slow ascent, casting long, pale shadows across the city, a new shift began to arrive, their faces still fresh and untroubled by the night's ordeal. The outgoing dispatchers offered tired smiles, a mute transfer of the immense burden they had just carried. The lessons learned from this night would echo through the center for years to come, a constant, silent reminder of the fragility of their system and the extraordinary resilience of the people who held it together. It was a testament to the fact that behind every calm voice, every reassuring word, there lay a complex, interconnected system operating at its absolute limit, held together by the unwavering dedication of those committed to serving their community, no matter the personal cost. The city slept, unaware of the silent war that had been waged on its behalf, a war that had been won, but only just.